this year's festival will have a fabulous lineup of speakers. These include journalists, storytellers, scientists who will help us make sense of curious, fascinating things, sometimes even mundane things around us, and understand all of this from the lens and logic of science. And it is only fitting for us to start a session at a Lit Fest trying to understand the evolution of language as well as how that shapes our identity. One thing that we have noticed in a Lit Fest and otherwise is that for some reason Indians are weirdly fascinated to understand their own ancestry, and we are actually encashing on that. And we are putting together here Laura Spinney, who's the author of an international bestseller, Proto. She will be talking about her understanding of how Indo-European languages have become one of these predominant language groups in the entire world. With her will be Dr. Thangaraj, who is the city's absolute authority on population genetics and has done many, many studies trying to understand ancestry of Indians and otherwise of various different communities in India. Putting them together will be Sahana Ghosh, who is the associate editor of Nature India and is a climate and health journalist. And Sahana, all over to you, and please welcome them all.
Microphones. Perfect.
Okay. All right. How are we all feeling? Hungry for information or hungry for food? Okay, hungry for information. I'll vote for that. Lovely. So, as we speak and converse, it strikes me suddenly that a lot of the languages we speak and we are familiar with owe their origins to something called Proto-Indo-European, right? And now, what we realize is the Indo-European family of languages are spoken by most of us, nearly half the world's population, living population. Okay, that's big. That's like a big piece of information to drop suddenly on all of your heads. So I think this is going to be a great opportunity for us to parse through what that factoid means to us all. And we go on living our daily lives, right? And we hardly blink and think of languages, although we know it's important to us, important to our identity, to our culture, food, the tongues that we speak in. And I'm not counting parcel tongue from Harry Potter in this. That's a separate talk in its own. But to kickstart, let's first understand why should we care about this? Why should we care about these scientific concepts and terminologies, Indo-European or Proto-Indo-European? How does it matter to us as we go on living our everyday lives, mundane or exciting otherwise? So, Laura, as a journalist and a communicator, what would your pitch be to people? Why the hell should we care about this?
It's an excellent question. Okay, I would say that in the West, in Europe or America, I come from Europe, when people think about their cultural roots, they think about the Greek myths or the oldest Latin texts. So they take themselves back to the Greeks and the Romans. In this part of the world, you may trace yourself back to the first Indian or, the ancient Indian or Vedic scripts, the Rig Veda, for example, the oldest of the Vedas. In Persia, you might trace yourself back to the Avesta and to the very first Persian scripts, which are related. But what I'm trying to say is that there's a deeper layer that connects East and West, that there are connections between Homer, the great, the Greek epics, which we consider in the West our cultural roots, and the Vedas in India. And people noticed that a very long time ago. People noticed linguistically, for example, the resonances in words, the fact that Deus in Latin, meaning God, has Deva as its counterpart in the Indic languages. Rex, Raja, Septum, Sapta, I could go on, Mata, 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 Pata, Pita. There are so many echoes across these languages which simply can't be explained away by coincidence. So these are the origins of understanding that there is a family of languages called the Indo-European family of languages. And as soon as you think of a language family that was already so widely spread in the ancient world across Eurasia, most of Eurasia, I think it's only natural to start asking yourself, who were the people who spoke the ancestral language of that family? Where did it all start? Where are the origins? Who were they? How did they live? When and where?
Right, and as journalists, I think we are so prone to some of these information because we are at the front line of what's happening in the world, right? So, and we see so much of disconnect and discord with wars raging around us. Would you say that this understanding also helps us connect more deeply with people here and people in other parts of the world?
Definitely. I mean, if you start thinking about these deeper links between us, you know, what links us rather than what separates us, of course, that's a very different optic to view the world through. And maybe Dr. Thangaraj can speak to this, because one of the things that ancient DNA has revealed so conclusively, I think, in the last 10, 20 years, is that humans have always moved. Humans have always moved, and therefore there is a sort of physical, biological, human explanation for why these connections exist.
Right, and this is a perfect segue for Dr. Thangaraj. Again, why should we care? And as a scientist, what is it that you think you also personally deeply care about, the studies that you do and these connections that Laura mentioned? These are now sort of invisibilized in the world, but then thanks to all of you, it's becoming more and more visible. So why should we care? Why do you care, and why should we care?
Yeah, thank you, Sahana, and good morning to all of you. As a geneticist, we look at differently. When you talk about language, we all know it's a tool for communication. But it's much beyond that. It's deeply rooted in our culture. And many of the time, people who relate the language even with the God or something, so sometimes they didn't even look at God so great, but they look at language and much more than that. But if you look at beyond the language itself, it has different kind of scenario when you look at the genetics, right? So what we look at for any kind of analysis, we need to something to start with, because we have 4 major linguistic groups: Dravidian, Indo-European, Austroasiatic, and Tibeto-Burman. And in fact, when we do genetic analysis, we can cluster them into 4 clusters. Actually, we can see them into 4 clusters. But the Indo-European and Dravidians, we don't distinctly see, but we can see as a kind of gradient. What it shows is that not that the language differentiating the people, but because the people who are speaking the language are, although they may stay in the same place, but their marriage practice is different. And that is very important for the people to understand, that the difference is because they are not marrying for the last several generations. And because of that, when every group acquired unique set of mutation, that's what makes them different. Because nothing like one language is bigger, other language is smaller, right? In many sense. So we have to look at that way, and we also look at health aspects, because when the people are marrying within the group, it could be any language, but now within the language we have several social groups. So in India, it's known for marriage within the social group. We see every social group in broad sense, because we are discussing about the language, as unique set of mutations. Sometimes it may cause disease. So that means some mutations are specific to one particular group of language. Therefore, they may be susceptible for a particular disease, but not the others. So we look at that way in terms of health, not generally looking at about their cultural aspect.
Right. So right, from the connections that we are exploring to, say, the science, I was curious, coming back to both of you again, were there any interesting insights? For example, Laura, when you were writing the book, did something jump out at you in terms of, wow, I didn't know this, I didn't realize this? Was there a moment?
So many things. It's difficult to know
Pick
where
one.
to start. I mean, so Dr. Thangaraj is, of course, right that the way that populations mix, the way that they interact, their social practices, the way they organize themselves socially and marry and so on, shapes the way culture is transmitted, the way language is transmitted in very important ways. I suppose to take a step back from that point, I would say that one of the things that comes through so forcefully when you study this subject is how fluid and constantly evolving language is. The same is true of culture, and the same, of course, is true of biology, but they're not, and although they follow each other largely very often, they don't always follow each other. They don't map necessarily directly onto each other one-to-one, because they're transmitted in different ways. So, for example, you get your genes from your parents, right? You get your culture from a wider group, and you can borrow it, and it's more complicated. And language is a different mechanism again, because languages can evolve by inheritance, but also horizontally, by loaning, by borrowing, and so on. We're going to talk about this with Peggy Mohan tomorrow, who's written fascinatingly about how languages merge. When populations come together, they merge in very different and interesting ways. So I think that's the main thing that I would like people to grasp, and that I needed to grasp, is that everything is so fluid. When we put a label on something like English or Sanskrit, we're already talking about a thing that is not one thing. Even before it becomes, in the case of Sanskrit, the Prakrits, and then Hindi, Urdu, etc. We're putting labels on things that are constantly evolving. So yes, I think that's what I would say.
That's very interesting. You talk of the fluidity, and that gives me, the segue for Dr. Thangaraj here. In terms of the fluidity that she mentioned, is there a tension between, say, science and linguistics, especially in your studies with ancient DNA? Do you see there's a tension between what evidence is emerging from, say, ancient DNA studies and what evidence emerges from language or linguistics? And then you marry it all with anthropological evidence, archaeological evidence. Sounds to me it's like a khichdi of sorts. So what's this khichdi all about? What are the spices, and what is the juicy things that are emerging from all this interdisciplinary science? And like Laura said, there was so much of fluidity that she saw in the language versus, say, how we imbibe or inherit culture and other aspects in our societies. What do you have to say about that?
So I can say about with a couple of examples. So one of the large ancient DNA studies suggests that again we take language from the linguist and convert that from our own genetic data, right? When we looked at a large number of ancient samples in one aspect, it shows that there could be the spread of Indo-European language from Yamnaya pastoralites towards both the sides, towards Europe and also to India. That's not too long, about maybe 2000 BCE, right? That's one. There is also evidence suggesting that from Iranian farmers, much later than uh, the uh, the uh, the time when the agriculture started, right? Much later, maybe less than 10,000 years, it has come. But these two are the evidence suggesting that there are multiple waves of the migration of people, and while migrating, they brought the languages, right? But still, there are some kind of discussion point, controversies which exist. So until otherwise we get more data, either from ancient DNA or from the contemporary DNA, it's very difficult to conclude which one is right, which one is wrong, or we are still looking for something.
We'll come back also to the controversies.
Yeah,
Yes.
yeah, can I just add something to that? So people might wonder why we're looking at archaeology and genetics when it's a question of language anyway, and there's a simple reason, which is that we're talking about languages, at least in the case of Proto-Indo-European, which was spoken about, we think, 5,000 years ago. We're talking about languages that were historic. That is before history, that is before writing. They were never written down. So we don't have any historical text to consult. That would be the easy way around it. And that's the problem. So we're bringing, with the next best thing, sorry, archaeologists in the room, but the next best thing is to go to archaeology, because they can give us information about what humans were doing at that time when we don't have text to describe it. They can tell us where they were, how they were living, in what way, and where they were moving. And genetics, of course, because genetics traces the people themselves. It's thanks to genetics that we've been able to trace some of these, in some cases, enormous, very impressive migrations. And in many cases, the diaspora of languages, as they're conventionally understood, the branching of languages in the past, does map on quite well to those prehistoric migrations, but not always. So, for example, very striking example, in India, the Scythians came, the Mughals came, and the Greeks came. None of them left their languages here. So it's not a given that people, when they move, will impose their language by any means. And the mechanisms by which people do switch language or languages change are not completely understood. They're very complicated, and we don't have a way of predicting them yet.
Right, like you said, it's very complicated, and I remember Dr. Thangaraj, we were discussing this in a podcast, and we had a podcast at Nature India on ancient DNA, and you did mention there also that it's very difficult to conclude. While you're writing your book, as a communicator, as a journalist, when you're not able to always conclude things, right, and science has uncertainties also, did it make your job difficult?
I think it's the most difficult thing I've ever done in my life. I thought I was going to go mad at certain points. Because in a way...
Thankfully you're here with us all.
Yeah, and only a little bit mad. But people who work on this question themselves from the different communities would say to me, we don't speak the same languages as each other. I think perhaps Dr. Thangaraj would confirm, I don't know. But, they're dealing in different sources of information. The way I think about it is there's three communities: linguistics, archaeology, genetics, tapping the side of the elephant and trying to guess what it is. But they need to work together to understand that it's an elephant. But they're looking at different sources of information. So, I talked about in my book how the word barbarian, which is often used in opposition to civilization, it comes originally from a word that meant in Sanskrit, somebody who speaks a foreign tongue. And they are barbarians to each other, the linguists, the archaeologists, and the geneticists. They speak different languages. So they're trying to work together because they understand the value in working together, but it isn't always easy.
Sounds parcel tongue is far easier to understand than all of this. But yeah, please, please add to that. Please add on to that.
So I agree with that. There's a migration, and people bring the language along with them. There are multiple examples.
Is there a point where you disagree?
No, I don't disagree, but most of the time we have to see whether they are continuing with the language or adopting the local language.
Right.
There are multiple sub-examples. For example, if you see, let us talk about outside migration first, then internally also. Siddhis, we trace them that they are Bantu speaking Africans. They are in Gujarat, they are in Karnataka, they are also in Hyderabad. But I don't think they speak their own language because they are staying in 3 different states which speak 3 different languages. I think they have adapted to that language and also genetically they are admixed with the local people. That's one example. Multiples of that, including Jewish and many more population. Even internally, one of the population called Mushar, they are very common in UP, Bihar, and other places. So they are actually Indo-European speakers now, but genetics says they are Austroasiatic, right? So it also has a lot of the health disparity.
Why is there a health disparity there?
Recently, since in 1992, I guess, there is a cholera breakout. Most of these people, Mushar, are severely affected. Some of them leave that place also, whereas others did not have any problem. As you know that for any disease, including infectious disease, there are genes, certain mutation makes them susceptible for the infection. Maybe they might have carried that mutation, hence they're all affected, but not others, right? So there are multiples of such things are existing.
And you did mention there are debates and controversies. What is, according to you, the top debate that still prevails, and especially for us in South Asia? What have we yet not acknowledged or have we not accepted in the context of these debates?
I'm not really aware of most of it. I think the linguists are the one who can able to tell that. We don't see that. But we know that there are controversies existing.
Anything that you've heard about, or even as a geneticist, you think that this is unresolved?
Something, the example which I said, people thought they are one language speakers, but they are on other language, right? Same way, that's one example. There are multiples of such that whatever recently happening, I'm sure it will happen in the recently. I said 4 major linguistic groups, Dravidians, Indo-European, there's a kind of gradient of cluster. Austroasiatic and Tibeto-Burman, they are very distinct. But in the recent past, we are seeing a lot more migration is happening, okay? So it happens in the next few generations. I'm sure that we may not even see that distinct cluster, right? Because the genetic
So it's
admixture
still,
and so
so
on.
that clustering is still evolving as we speak?
Cluster might dilute now.
Might dilute, okay.
Yes, because
okay.
of the admixture,
Okay.
because of the mixing of genetics.
Right. And I saw Laura nodding. Do you have something here to say?
I have plenty to say.
Please, please.
I mean, first of all, it's a brilliant point about increasing migration. If you think of, we tend not to think about our languages continuing to evolve now, but if you think of the migration that's going to be set in train by the climate crisis, that will have linguistic consequences. It's one aspect that people don't really think about. But I wanted to come to your point about controversies. I think the most obvious controversy linguistically here in the subcontinent is about what language the Harappan civilization spoke. And I know it's a thorny issue. My attitude is it's worth just airing it in as scientific a way as we can. But there's plenty of uncertainty around it because we haven't deciphered the script of the Harappan civilization, the Indus Valley civilization. Until somebody does that, and it may never happen or it may do, we will not know. We will have no certainty about what they spoke because that's the only way that we can do it.
I will come back to the climate and linguistics
but
also.
if I may just say, we know there was a migration into India from Central Asia at about the right time, but again, those people may not have imposed their language, they may have taken up the local language, or we may have had a merging of the two. Many permutations are possible.
Right. And Dr.
One
Thangaraj,
point
yeah.
I want to continue about Indus Valley civilization. You might have seen recently about 3-4 years back, the archaeologists have found one intact skeleton, and we did sequencing that.
Is that the Rakhigadi?
Rakhigarhi
Right.
one. Yeah, it did show that it has a two different genome. One is ancestral ancient South Indian, that's nothing but the Andamanis. Major proportion are the Iranian hunter-gatherers, not the farmers. Okay? But the bone itself is not that old, it's 3000 BCE. But when we look at the genome, it shows that it is of more than 10,000 year old.
Yeah, okay.
Does it challenge existing hypotheses around the Harappan civilization?
Because this is only one sample, we can't really talk much about that. At least one sample shows that there was a migration from Iran, much older, much before the agriculture came into existence, much before the Neolithic period. Subsequently, what happened, we don't know. If more samples are found, I think probably we may able to add this much better.
So what Dr. Thangaraj is saying is that the skeleton predates the known migration that could possibly have brought Indo-European, but it's already a mix of people from Iran who may or may not have brought some farming knowledge as well. That's another debate.
yes.
And people who had been here for much longer. So they're already a mix, but we can't see the Indo-European, the possible Indo-European speaking thread coming in yet. Of course, the problem is that the shortage of DNA from the Indus Valley, because it's not an environment which is preserved well.
Yeah, I was just getting into this shortage of DNA because we've had.
Just one point.
Yeah, yeah.
You say that, yes, people were here much before that. The Andamanis are the one who
Yeah.
migrated out of Africa about 65,000 to 70,000 years back.
Yeah.
They're the
So
first.
why is there a shortage of DNA, right? We've had ancient DNA samples in different parts of the world, especially in Africa, right? Rich in ancient DNA. Why are we not getting that sample set yet?
So because of the climatic condition, so because our climate, the sample probably is not preserved well, therefore we are unable to find. Some are fossilized already. Some of the samples which I have seen collected by Anthropological Survey of India, kept in their own institute in Calcutta, but most of them are fossilized. It's not able to do any kind of analysis. So only the accessible in the sense of analysis are of maybe 2000, 3000 BC,
Not beyond that.
beyond
And
that.
do we have possible samples which are maybe in the natural history museums in other parts of the world? Because again, that's an issue, thorny issue, where these samples have not been, a lot of these museum samples have not been repatriated to us. So are there any possibilities that you could find some ancient DNA there?
No, only sample from India was found in Duckworth Laboratory Museum in Cambridge, that is of Andamanis. That was an interesting story behind that. When Britishers captured the region, wanted to construct the cellular jail, they killed most of them, and they took their skull and hair and kept in the museum. But of course, that's not again very old sample. But you are right, in the Europe, there are 7,000, 8,000 year old bone sample. One of the study where we are also part of it, try to understand the way we have shown in the prehistoric India, there were two founding population in India, ancestral South Indian and ancestral North Indian. Similarly, there's a three different source for the Europeans that came from that ancient DNA studies. That also interesting to see because they are 7,000, 8,000 year old. The agriculture aspect and also the lactate persistent gene mutations, skin color mutations, all we can able to correlate with how these mutations have evolved.
And so just conditions aren't just conducive enough
Yes.
for these samples. But then isn't that leaving a lot of questions unresolved for us in South Asia? I mean, you mentioned the importance of historical texts, and we don't seem to have a lot of it compared to, say, other parts of the world. Is that what you were?
Well, I'm not sure I'd make a distinction between South Asia and other parts of the world. Different cultures started writing at different times everywhere. But, I mean, we could go through it in detail if you like, but perhaps that's not interesting. I just wanted to say on the point about the Harappan civilization and what language they spoke, that very specific and controversial question, I think the best hope of resolving it is in archaeology, and not archaeology of human remains, because the DNA is an issue, as we've just discussed, but archaeology of texts. Only a small fraction of the Harappan sites have been excavated, and we know that they had trade links with, for example, Mesopotamia and so on. So it's not impossible that we would unearth, or the archaeologists would unearth one day, the equivalent of the Rosetta Stone. That is a bilingual document that would allow you to decipher the Harappan script, if indeed it is a script, because there are different theories, and therefore work out what language they spoke.
Again, while you were researching for the book, you were obviously talking to a lot of your sources, right? I mean, scientists, geneticists, and archaeologists and anthropologists. How do you align as a communicator, as a journalist, how do you align all these discrepancies, all these uncertainties? Is there a process, and is there any best practice as a communicator that we should probably be looking at? We strive to look at the evidence, right? So evidence first and everything else later. But again, in these cases where there's so much of uncertainty, so much of lack of resolution, especially in South Asia, how do we align ourselves as communicators, or even as Dr. Thangaraj, he does a lot of science communication and outreach. How do we align all of this information?
I mean, I think it's an excellent question, because obviously each field has its own controversies and its own debates and its own areas of uncertainty. And I'm dealing with 3 fields, each of which are arguing with themselves, let alone, the higher order disagreements between them. Think about our ultimate goal here. It's about trying to understand a language, in the case of Proto-Indo-European, that died out 4,000 years ago and was never written down. I mean, some people might say, why on earth are you even trying to answer that question? It's rather arrogant to try and answer that question. In some ways it is. And I did ask myself the question, is this the time to write the book? But I don't think we're ever going to get to the answer. We can get closer. We definitely have more of the picture, I think, than, say, 30 years ago, mainly thanks to ancient DNA. And in the meantime, people want to answer that question. Therefore, the vacuum is getting filled with crazy theories. So that's how I justify writing the book. What I tried to do in the manner in which I communicated it was to say there are no right answers. There is simply layers of evidence building towards one theory or another. And so we can only get at it indirectly. I did not necessarily air every theory on every point of the story, because it would have become impossible to follow. But I did make it clear that I was only picking one of the mass, and that, again, it wasn't a definitive answer. That's the way I did it.
Right, and you wanted to avoid cherry picking, right? So that's something that we strive really, we're very scared of that just because we're doing something, we are writing a story or a book, we distance ourselves from cherry picking. Now, in science, how do you avoid cherry picking of data?
So when we generate the data, we try to address all aspects of it, right? So we don't cherry pick, but we highlight some of the point. We may not highlight other point, particularly if it is more sensitive to the people, right? So that's the way we do that, yes.
Right, and like you said, you're also trying to resolve, but at the same time not, again, add fuel to a lot of the misinformation and disinformation out there. And a lot of the misinformation, disinformation out there, again, has to do with climate change as the climate crisis evolves. You mentioned about how this is also going to impact this field. What is it that you see, Laura, that's probably, as citizens, as journalists, that we should be really careful of?
I mean, a lot of the story of the evolution of the Indo-European languages in the past is about climate change. not so much human-induced climate change, because that's a relatively recent phenomenon,
time,
of course.
yeah.
But yeah, you know, there was a major climate episode in the world about 2200 BC, which triggered a lot of migrations and had linguistic consequences. That's why I say it's likely to happen in the future as well. Even if we're in a different environment now because we have widespread literacy, we have writing with the internet, we have social media, it's a different educational environment and technological environment. But still, I think it would be fair to say that most linguists consider migration is a major, if not the main motor of language change. Therefore, I just wanted to raise that flag. I'm not trying to predict how languages will change in any detailed way because we can't do it. But
Something we should watch out for.
It will definitely have an impact. And I also wanted to say, because we've been rather maybe negative sounding about how we can't necessarily get to the truth and so on, but I think we can eliminate some things along the way. Wouldn't you agree, Dr. Thangaraj? There are certain possibilities that we can say, well, it probably wasn't that, you know, and now here are the possibilities, and narrow down the possibilities in each case.
What are the possibilities, Dr. Thangaraj? Just to wrap up the discussion,
Okay.
give us something positive to you know, spend our weekends, to pin our hopes on.
In terms of language and the...
Yes, the science that you're doing, and what is it that you see is going to be possible?
Maybe I can give you broader overview. The science which we do, particularly I'm talking about myself for the last 3 decades, we started trying to understand the population history, and now it is shaping into different direction. So not only understanding the population history, we can also tell society that genetically we're all connected, right? So the difference what we see superficially now, it's all happened in the last few hundred or few thousand years, but if you deeply look at our genetics, we're all the same, we're all admixed.
So
Right?
stop fighting, basically. All right. Thank you so much, Laura and Dr. Thangaraj, for this interesting discussion. Lovely. I know it's a lot of information when you just read these statistics about Indo-European languages, this family, and how we all speak the same tongues, basically in different ways or the other, how a lot of us are also connected, and it might not just seem as so, but what we have successfully, I think, done today is at least give you a glimpse of how it all happens in a lab, how it also happens in these field work that you all do, how as a journalist or as a communicator, we have an immense responsibility to tell the truth. We are burdened with telling the truth. At the same time, we know there are a lot of things that are unresolved, there are uncertainties, and how do we communicate that uncertainty without just telling people, oh, like we don't know anything yet. That's not what we are trying to say. We are trying to say, yes, this is what we know for certain, and what we know for certain is that we are genetically also connected, and the fact that there are real threats, real dangers, human-induced climate change, that is perhaps going to create an impact, and only science, time, and all these other evidences are going to make that clearer. So on that note, I would love to hear questions from the audience.
Thank you. This question is to Laura Spinney. The Oxford English Dictionary today has about 350,000 words. Ancient Greek, you had 65,000 lemata. Whereas the Proto-European that you have written so well about has maybe a few thousand, 2,000 words or so. My question is, this rapid expansion in vocabulary, were there any cultural conditions which led to rapid expansion, or is it just a linear function of, like, you know, more and more people on the planet?
What was the first dictionary you said?
Whether there were any...
No, the first dictionary you said.
Oxford English,
English, yeah.
350,000.
Well, in my book I wrote that 1,600 words of Proto-Indo-European have been reconstructed. In fact, they're actually stems rather than words, so you can add endings and they become a number of words each. But that's just the ones we've been able to reconstruct. It's far smaller than the actual vocabulary they would have spoken, because there's many reasons why we may not be able to reconstruct a word. We reconstruct a dead language that was never written very briefly by comparing the descendant words and phrases in the living languages and in the dead languages that have been historically attested. So that's just a skeleton of the languages that was spoken. We can't really compare it, therefore, with a modern written language like or the other that you mentioned. It's not an expansion necessarily, although, of course, as we come up with more technologies and more concepts, we're going to have to need more words.
So you think there were more words even in the Proto-European stage, is what you're saying?
I don't know. That's a good question. Yeah, I mean, maybe they had 4,000 words for snow or something. I have no idea.
Okay, that's fine. Small question linguistic question to Thangaraj, okay? Sorry. Take the town of Palghat, which sits on the border of Tamil Nadu and Kerala, okay? The language there is kind of a mixture of Malayalam and Tamil. Do you think that these kind of places you will evolve into new languages going along with genetic mixing? I mean,
No, I don't think so. But there could be a slight change the way we speak, but the script may be the same because there's no necessary for evolving with the new script, right? So even Hyderabad, the Telugu, Urdu and Hindi, so I think most of the people speak mixture of all three, right? But the script is the same, yes.
Yeah, so my question is to both the speakers. This book, Sapiens, by Yuval Noah Harari, in one of the chapters, he mentions about the Homo sapiens writing or kind of accumulating whatever data they collected on strings. So have you come across this in your respective research, this particular part? And that's how they kind of moved it forward. So.
I'm not very sure about that, but I know that some of the old populations, including Andamanis, they have their own way of writing, but I don't know really that what kind of language. But Dr. Anvita Abi from JNU, she worked very extensively on the Andamanis language. Probably she may be the good person to talk about that.
I think there are some cultures in Central and South America, historical cultures that used strings and knots as ways of communicating. If you call that a script, the world's writing systems are amazingly diverse and varied. And there isn't a one-to-one relationship between language and writing either. So you can write one language in many different scripts and vice versa. So in a way, your question is about writing rather than language.
I have a quick question. Apologies, I haven't read Proto yet. So I'll ask a slightly off-topic question. Looking at Gen Z and their WhatsApp messages, it looked like we were going to a post-language world. Right? The way they communicate on WhatsApp. But now once Gen AI has come, they're forced to write questions so that AI understands properly. So it looks like AI is kind of reviving the younger generation language. Slightly off-topic from this session, but what do you think of AI reviving the language, which seems to have lost with Gen Z's SMS, WhatsApp type, and the influence of AI on our language going forward?
Yeah, that's a good question. So I wouldn't say that we're post-language. I think that's a view that comes that forgets that language is always evolving. It's always evolving. If I can give a little analogy, there's lots of people are talking at the moment about what will happen to English, right? Will it shatter into a thousand daughter languages like Latin did, for example, towards the end of the Roman Empire? And again, it's a foolhardy linguist who would comment on that because it's very difficult to predict future language change. But one who I persuaded to give me a vague prediction said that he didn't think that would happen for the simple reason that two subjects of the Roman Empire lived at either ends of that empire would probably have been illiterate. So their languages, their spoken languages would have been very different as Latin was dividing into its dialects, which eventually became the Romance languages. And there was nothing holding them together. There was no written script, shared written script that was holding their languages together. So they just went their separate ways. English is different because even though Asian English, Indian English, American English, the various Caribbean Englishes are all going their separate ways. That's undeniable, to the extent that even sometimes they have to be subtitled to each other on TV now. They are held together by a single standard English script that we all share. So there's something different going on here. And I think it's similar with AI, right? I mean, AI is using that standard script that we have, but the kind of vernaculars are definitely doing their own thing, and probably social media is accelerating that. So it's anybody's guess where this will go, but there are some opposing forces in action.
Hi. Thank you for that fascinating discussion. And it's really nice to have a genetics expert and a linguistics expert together on the stage. And my question is to both of you. So in the context of adaptability and evolution of a language, is there any work done on whether this ability to learn and adapt to new languages is an individual ability or it's an ability of certain groups over others? Is there some knowledge on that? And in that case, is there a cultural basis to it, or is it a genetic basis for this adaptability?
So do some people learn languages better than others?
Essentially, yes.
I don't think there's any data that I know of on that.
So I think there could be some genetic basis for learning language, but depending upon the situation, depending upon the push from others and the situation. For example, take me, I could not learn Hindi, but not for often, because I saw that Telugu is much easier to learn, right? If I have to live in Delhi or some part of northern part of India, I would have learned, right? So depending upon the opportunity and the necessity is the one. But otherwise, generally it's known that children can pick up the language very fast, right? So certain age, so that is known fact, I think. So there are multiple things.
I think there are individual differences, but probably it's a multi-genetic, polygenetic skill. Humans are very good at it compared to other species, but within humans, I think there's too many genetic contributions to the ability to pick up language that we could see group differences, although clearly there are individual differences.
Thank you.
I'm not sure if I missed this in the first 10 minutes, but in the modern day Indo-European languages, is there something that is absolutely common across this entire, geographical distribution, something about the grammar, something about the syntax, or, is there something that is absolutely or more or less common across these languages?
So that's a good question, actually, because it's more about the configuration. These are languages that have been spoken, people would, I think the conventional opinion would be, for at least 5,000 years. And so they've all gone very much in their own direction. But when you compare them, they have enough similarities between them, whether it be vocabulary, grammar, sound, that the configuration of each one means linguists are there's no doubt about the fact that the 12 branches of the Indo-European language family do belong there. I think of the many controversies that linguists have amongst themselves, that's one that would not be controversial. They would agree on that. So there's a very distinct profile of the Indo-European family, even if they don't all share the same ingredients of it. And that's another indication of how, languages evolve. Many people call language our oldest tool. It's one of the tools that helps us to adapt to our environment because it helps us to communicate with each other. And since every environment is different, the language adapts in different ways. So you mean people coming together who speak different languages, how do they agree what language should dominate and should be the lingua franca, so to speak? Yes, good question. Because obviously the main function of language is that we should be able to communicate with each other. So, you know, we need something. And in fact, as I wrote in my book, you know, it'd be very difficult to find a single example in recorded human history of people trading in valuable gifts if they don't have a language in common, which is, you know, obviously one reason why people come together. So I think the simple answer would be that it's the most powerful group that imposes their language, at least as the language of sort of communication between groups. Because, and that, when I say powerful, I don't necessarily mean politically powerful. It may be the sellers, the traders, the people who have the valuable goods may impose their language because people want what they've got. So that's just one simple example of how these things are shaped by social, economic, and cultural mechanisms.
So thank you, Laura, and thank you, Dr. Thangaraj. And on that note, we'll wrap up the session. So learn more languages, learn about the connections, eat well, sleep well, and also learn a bit about the Gen Z terms. When I was telling my cousins that I'm coming here, and they texted me, "This slaps." Okay, so it took me a moment to understand what does this mean, this slaps. They were just telling me, "Wow, this is so cool." So from cool, now it slaps, this slaps. So yes, so this is how we are also evolving, and a lot of things are going to evolve as well. Have a great weekend, and thank you all for your attention and patience. Thank you so much.